Hey, welcome back to Wild Rover Sailing. This week, we return to the cabin top to complete a little more preparation work on the deadlight recesses. When we last left off, I'd just finished installing a thickened bed of epoxy into the deadlight frames and applied a wooden plug template over it. This did a pretty good job of building up all the voids to a uniform height. The next task would be to fill in any gaps that were missed. While the epoxy sets up, let's move on to building a new washboard for the companionway. Remember the cardboard template I had set up in the first episode? Well, it's time to put it to use. I had taken the template to a local plastics company to price out making the washboard in acrylic. But when I got the estimate back, I nearly threw up. A few years back, when I replaced both deadlights, it was only a couple $100. Now my estimate for the deadlight and a washboard was nearly $1,000. So I decided to make the washboard out of plywood. I still had some leftover marine ply with a birch veneer on one side from when I did this job a few years back. I know I'll only get a few seasons out of it, but that's okay. They're easy to make. Unfortunately, my fancy oak louver had deteriorated beyond reuse, so I scavenged the teak handle from the original factory washboard and prepared it for installation. This would be the new vent cover. This is the original factory-made washboard. It's made from teak plywood, and it did its job for many years. Here I'm using it as a template to trace out the vent opening where the handle will go. A full jerry can makes a pretty handy counterweight, don't you think? Back on board the boat, I used some polyurethane to attach the loose sink back down to the countertop. Unfortunately, this repair only lasted a couple weeks before it separated. I need a new method for this. Full removal and scrubbing of the ceiling surface to get rid of any remaining rotted gasket stuck in there, I suppose. The cabin top epoxy had cured, so the next step was sanding, the most awful and laborious part of any boat project. This is where proper tools make light work of any task. This mini air-powered belt sander is really handy for getting into the tight crevices. Thickened marine epoxy is structural and very dense. It takes a lot of surgical sanding to fair the surfaces. My trusty Makita orbital sander started giving me trouble. The hook-it fastening pad was wearing out and no longer gripping the sanding disc. Needless to say, this became a frustrating issue. Surveys in 6 days. So I still need to do one more fairing coat on all my repairs and a little more grinding. I might have to take this jib track off. I got started sanding the teak. It's just a first pass, very quick one. Needs a little more detail, but it's a lot better. So that's more of like an enjoyable job to do versus epoxy and fiberglassing. So I don't want to go too hog wild on this because it'll turn silver before I get a chance to put the teak oil on it. So I got to be careful. Other jobs, got to put the main breaker in. Got to inspect the impeller, maybe put a new one in. And a few more coats on my new companionway door because the plastic quote came in far too much money. Another day, another epoxy application. With any luck, this would be the last one. It was time to address the teak handrails. Overall, they were in pretty good shape, and there was no sign of rot or leaking. They would just need a good sanding, new screw plugs installed, and a good coat of teak oil. Years back, I had removed the handrails and rebed them in filled and drilled holes for the butyl sealer. But the screw plugs rotted out, since the bare teak was much more resilient than the oak plugs. So now I had to remove what remained of the oak plugs and reinstall them. Five-minute epoxy would be good enough for the new plugs.